Dr. Scott Jones, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Great to be here, Logan. Thank you.
So let's just jump right in. What makes effective marketing?
Yeah, that's a great question to sort of start something like this. I think the word marketing is used in most people use it as a synonym for things like advertising or sales, um, and that certainly is part of marketing. Uh, from as an academic discipline, the way I've always liked to describe it is it's every decision that companies make that directly impacts customers. And so to really understand marketing, it begins with an understanding of who are customers. Um, and you can subdivide that into who are customers that are individual consumers. You oftentimes hear the phrase B2C, businesses to individual consumers, but also B2B customers. So other companies and organizations, when you're trying to understand and develop a profile for companies as customers, it's a matter of understanding the industry in which they operate, their competitive position, how they make decisions. You can imagine that individuals, we tend to make our own decisions, while companies oftentimes involve groups of people, budgeting, planning. And so the just basically understanding the differences between fundamental customer differences is really where marketing begins. And then, of course, we can go into advertising. I always like to joke that there's no sense in running an advertisement until you know who your customer is, what your product and service is, and what hole that fills in the market, how you're going to distribute the product to a final customer, what the pricing point for that customer is, and then you can go about actually running advertising. But until you've made all of those other decisions, it really doesn't make a lot of sense to run any advertising.
So is it true that can I guess let me back up. Can you outmarket a bad product?
Not in the long term. And I think one of the things that really is important to understand is that marketing isn't just about finding a customer; it's about retaining those customers. And that's where you get into customer relationship management, understanding long time customer lifetime values. So I suppose if you're a company that's selling a poor product and you just want to sell the product once, and then you're done with that relationship, maybe you can get away with it for a while. But certainly in the long term, you're trying to find customers that are going to be around, that you can develop relationships with, and perhaps more importantly, customers that are going to provide positive word of mouth for your company, because ultimately that is the best quote advertising. Right. It's not seeing a TV ad. It's not seeing a billboard ad. It's having Logan share with his friends companies that he was impressed with, that uses the products regularly. That's the kind of real advertising that creates great value, is that positive word of mouth. And you really can't get away with that if you're not delivering on your expectations. It's sort of related to that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of
One
course.
of my takes has always been that marketing is so much about managing expectations, and what companies never want to be in the situation is over promising and under delivering. And so you would rather be moderate in terms of the expectations that you set and then exceed them, as opposed to what you were describing is maybe promising the world to someone and not delivering on it.
Yeah, it brings me back to I'm thinking of crypto and people use the term rug pull. Hey, it's this great thing and then whoop, it's all gone. Lost all your
Rug,
money.
and that's a great description for it. The rug gets pulled right underneath you, kind of thing. And yes, that's the crypto market is a fascinating one over the last couple years. Just looking at what's happened to that, and the confidence that consumers have in those offerings is still, I think, quite very much up in the air.
I have like three different trains of thought right now. One is brand and kind of building on, that word of mouth, which also loops into companies like Tesla who don't technically advertise. But like
Mhm.
you said, if someone has a positive review, shares it, I mean, you never, if one person shares it with two people, you never have to advertise ever.
No, that's a great point, and I think Elon does his own advertising on X, comma formerly known as Twitter. I still think it's funny that it seems like every media report still has to include that reminder that this used to be Twitter.
Yeah.
As an aside, I still, you know, I'm always fascinated when brands change their name, and particular brands that have strong equity. And and Twitter to me was a great example of a brand that had great equity. People understood it, what it meant. The name itself tells you what it's about, what it's doing. And I've always been fascinated by the decision to switch to X. It reminds me of when Gatorade, 10, 15 years ago, began tweaking with their brand name. I don't know if you recall, they went through a period of time where they started calling it G. Um,
G2,
and
yeah.
and I've always speculated that this is sort of an aside, but they ran a brilliant Super Bowl ad 18, 19 years ago now, which was sort of a famous advertisement because it featured Michael Jordan, Peyton Manning, the usual cast of endorsers and celebrities that endorse Gatorade. But it was also the ad that where the first time they made very clear why it was called Gatorade. Do you know why it's called Gatorade?
Go Gators.
Go Gators. And that ad revealed that, right? There was actually a clip of a former professor at the University of Florida saying, naturally, that's why we call our stuff Gatorade. What I've speculated for decades since is that what they realized is how many people were turned off by that message. Specifically, how many Georgia Bulldog fans did not know that's why it was called Gatorade? Tennessee fans, Alabama fans, Florida State fans, that what they made salient in a beautiful advertisement was a very strong negative association. And we don't need to go down that road. I can go on and on talking about this because this is some of the stuff I do research on. But that's what I refer to as a horn effect. That if you, especially in the world of sport, if you have really strong negative perceptions or associations with certain sport brands, you can actually punish companies that are sponsors of those brands. And much in the same way here that Gatorade, right, revealing that it's associated with the University of Florida, for some people that's going to be a very negative association. So I talk about it a good bit in my sponsorship class. If you think about the New York Yankees, are one of the most valuable sport properties to invest in terms of sponsorship because of the size of their audience, the passion of the fan base. But what those companies probably don't realize or truly account for is how many people dislike the Yankees, and whether that negative perception of the Yankees carries over to brands that are sponsors. And a few years ago, I actually published a study with a few co-authors that revealed that is the case. That if you have a very strong negative association toward a sport property, you will carry over those negative associations to a sponsor.
That's really interesting. It's so the horn effect.
Horn effect, and the flip side of that's also known as the halo effect. So simply by a company that if a company that aligns as a sponsor of the Yankees should benefit from those people that are Yankee fans, right? They see the sponsor as part of the team. There's no sport better than that, of course, than auto racing, specifically NASCAR, where the drivers almost inevitably at the end of a race are going to thank their sponsors. So they really emphasize how the sponsors are part of the team. And that's one of the reasons why that there's a great deal of brand loyalty amongst fans of drivers toward the sponsors of their favorite drivers.
That's interesting. As a Cowboys fan, I'm thinking of America's team, how that can kind of bring everyone in as opposed to, creating that negative association.
Yeah, yeah, and the Cowboys are much like the Yankees. That the size of their fan base and their historical success is also part of the reason why they tend to have a pretty large group of people that don't like them, that enjoy pulling against them. That's obviously a very common feature of sports fans that if you don't have a direct rooting interest in the teams or athletes participating, you tend to pull for the underdog. People prefer David versus Goliath. And the Cowboys would be one of those teams, whether they've had the on the field success recently or not, that for a lot of people that they are Goliath, and any opportunity to see them lose. There's quite a few people that pull in to watch Cowboy games to pull for whoever's playing against them. Let's put it that
Yeah,
way.
I witnessed that a little too much, unfortunately. I know Stephen A. Smith likes when they lose.
Right. Yeah, no, and there's certainly plenty of members of the media that sort of add on to that. And I think part of it is also just how polarizing the owner of the Cowboys can be, Jerry Jones, and that, there's very few people, of course, that really know much about the ownership of their favorite teams, but Jerry Jones is obviously a very hands-on owner. And even Cowboy fans probably have a lot of mixed emotions about Jerry as their owner. And what role he plays in making decisions for the team and things of that nature.
Definitely interesting. Let's talk about the NIL. This is something I kind of know what's going on, but I feel like there's definitely a marketing angle in that. So can you just start from the scratch? Tell for someone who doesn't know what's going on with that right now.
Yeah. I was hopeful you might tell me a little bit more about it. I may have mentioned, or I don't know if you're aware of this, I'm also the faculty athletic rep for Stetson University. So I do have been more abreast at others, in addition to obviously that I do a lot of research in sport marketing things. I'll take you back to when this really began, and I think a lot of people don't. Well, there's been calls, obviously, for decades for college athletes to be able to receive some compensation for the use of their name, image, and likeness in various promotions. Obviously, universities have been doing this for years, using student athletes to promote ticket sales, sponsorship, licensing opportunities, without the players or the athletes receiving any compensation. So it's long been an interesting legal question, and like almost all significant law that impacts sport, it's antitrust law is the body of law that is the focus here. And specifically, there was a basketball player named Ed O'Bannon who played for UCLA in the late 1990s, early 2000s. I don't remember the exact year. But about 4 or 5 years after he had left UCLA, and he went on to have, I think, a pretty decent NBA career, EA Sports, Electronic Arts, released a college basketball video game that featured some prominent historic teams. So you could play the 92 Duke team versus the 2004 UCLA team, right, in the video game. And they were using, of course, the name, image, likeness of those athletes that were on those teams. That was the case that really the first domino that fell was Ed O'Bannon leading a class action lawsuit stating, look, I am no longer an NCAA athlete. You could have used my name, image, likeness while I was at UCLA under scholarship. But now that I am a graduate, I'm no longer bound by my scholarship restrictions, that EA Sports should have sought my name, image, likeness, an agreement with me for the use of that. And that was really the first domino that began to fall in acknowledging that, in this case, a former student athlete should be able to receive compensation. And that I think that case is almost 10 years old now, but
Wow.
it was really the first crack in the metal, so to speak, about whether players should be compensated or not. Some of the people in your audience may not be aware that there was a ruling a few years ago called the Alston rule, where colleges can now actually pay student athletes up to, I think it's just under $6,000 a year. Many schools are already doing that. They have a choice as to whether they're going to place restrictions on or come up with different criteria that are necessary. So it could be that you have to have a certain GPA. I know some universities are requiring them to go through financial financial wealth management types of classes to understand the tax implications before they can receive that compensation. But in short, where we're at with NIL right now is every state has its own distinct laws regarding that. Some states have no law whatsoever about whether athletes can receive that compensation. One of the biggest challenges that we've got is that international students, which there are quite a few that play NCAA sports, they put their visa status in jeopardy should they receive compensation. So I was at a meeting just recently that was talking about how a basketball player on a team that was not born in the U.S., he received some NIL money when the team played in the Bahamas Christmas tournament. He could receive compensation from businesses in the Bahamas, but not in the United States. So the point is that it's literally the wild, wild west. You've heard that phrase before. We really don't know what laws are governing the NIL relationships. There is a good bit of bipartisan support in Congress right now. I believe it's Senator Cruz in Texas, as well as Senator Booker from New York, are trying to put together a bipartisan legislation to provide some kind of guidance to level the playing field here to make sure that all of these student athletes are being treated fairly when it comes to those things. So it's a fascinating time in the world of college sports. Obviously, the transfer portal is another giant element that, again, on the surface, why shouldn't student athletes be able to transfer to different universities and treat themselves as free agents when it comes to college athletics? So you can certainly see the case that for the rights of the student athletes in that regard, and yet I think most fans are. It will be harder and harder for fans. One of the challenges, of course, in college sports is to get fans to really engage with and get to know the athletes that are on the teams. And if you've got turnover every year, it's impossible basically to develop those kinds of relationships. And I really do think in the long term, it's going to hurt certainly some sports when it comes to the revenue side for universities, that fans just don't know who these athletes are and they question their loyalty, and that's legitimate concern as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I almost feel like it's creating like a minor league and a major league, because I guess the NFL, you don't really go to a less talented team to transfer up. Everyone's pretty good, more or less, and it's just more about the money, things like that. But here, I mean, and I guess we already kind of saw that people would go to D3 schools, transfer over, or JUCO or something like that. But now I feel like people will go to bigger programs so they can transfer up and then maybe transfer up again until they get to like an Alabama or UF, FSU college like that.
Yeah, and I'm happy for the student athletes. I've been working with them for years in different capacities, just as a professor, but in other roles on campus. And at the same time, let's just be candid. Stetson made the NCAA men's basketball tournament this year. They get beat by UConn, and I think 48 hours later, 10 of the players had put their name in the transfer portal. And again, I don't knock those student athletes for pursuing their, what they're looking for, but it certainly has a cost associated with, not just from the fan perspective, but imagine how much money is simply spent now on recruiting at all schools. Obviously, that's been a significant part of a budget for athletic departments for years, but it used to be that you were just recruiting freshmen, and now you're recruiting every single year. You've got all of these people leaving and coming and going, and the costs are certainly quite high for athletic departments.
Yeah,
the other one, if you don't mind, I just thought I'd touch on this.
Yeah,
I think the most fascinating thing for me about what's going on in college sports is to appreciate that the NCAA has virtually no leverage and no power over the changes that are going on in college sports. If there are entities that do have some power, it's the conferences. And the conferences are the ones that have really messed this up, all in the pursuit of dollars. And I'll just be candid, this is my opinion. um, this is all driven by football television revenue. All of it, all of the conference realignment is entirely about increasing the value of the media package for television rights for conference football. And what it ignores are every other student athlete in that athletic department. I did my undergrad at Florida State. I did my PhD at Oregon. Florida State students are going to, student athletes are going to be going to Cal and Stanford to play 2 out of 3 games in softball and then have to fly back. The very next weekend, the Cal lacrosse team is going to travel to Virginia or Duke. They're crossing 3 time zones to play a handful of games because this alignment was entirely about football. Football players usually have 4 or 5 road trips a year, and then they have a week off or 2 weeks off, right, before they have to travel again. All these other sports don't benefit from those kinds of scheduling breaks. And so what I really hope down the road, I don't know if you're a fan of Chip Kelly, the former UCLA head football coach. Yeah, he proposed something the other day which just makes a lot of sense, and I think may end up being where we end up going. And that is, we've already basically split college football off of the general business model of college sports, right? I always joke with my sport properties class that, I'll ask the question, who is the defending national champion, NCAA national champion in football? And of course, they all would raise their hand and say Michigan. No, it's South Dakota State is the defending NCAA champion. Michigan does not play NCAA football, just like the Gators and the Bulldogs and UCLA don't. They play college football playoff group football. It's its own separate division, and it was done so that all of those top tier teams could keep their revenue and not have to share it with the smaller schools of the world that were also NCAA D1 schools.
Interesting.
So that, and that actually happened. The first break in that was the BCS, if you remember the Bowl Coalition series.
Okay.
And that was the first attempt to sort of break away college football from all of the other sports. And obviously it's just grown since then. It also comes back to antitrust issues because it was the University of Utah that about 15 years ago was left out of a BCS national title game, despite the fact that they were undefeated. And LSU and Oklahoma, 2 schools with 1 loss, were selected to play in that title game. So the state of Utah, not the University of Utah, the state of Utah filed an antitrust lawsuit against the BCS, claiming an unreasonable restraint of their trade. They had met every objective measure that should have got them into that national title game. And since the University of Utah is a public university, the state could argue that the state's taxpayers were the ones harmed by this unreasonable restraint of trade.
Wow.
So if you don't know that, and that's basically what prompted the BCS to have to revisit and ultimately adopt a playoff system where you would at least have 4 schools that had a chance. Since you're here in the state of Florida, you know that this last year we had another school, Florida State, that ended up in the exact same situation. And the Attorney General for the state of Florida, who is a very proud Gator, by the way, was very boisterous, right, about Florida State is a public university. They met every criteria that should have got them into that playoff, and we're filing an antitrust lawsuit against the college football playoff group. I haven't heard anything more on where that went, but obviously much of that will be passed aside now as we move to a 12-team college football playoff this season. But anyway, antitrust law is all over the changes that we see in the world of sport.
Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't know any of that. It sounds like there's a lot more than just the selection committee at play when they're determining what's going to go where. What I've never even understood the point of conferences really. I mean, obviously you break it apart, but now I hear. So what is their real power? It's the media deals they have.
Yeah, correct. And this is what just to contrast it, this is sort of what Chip Kelly of UCLA and many other leaders in college sport are advocating at this point. Yeah, conferences are the ones that package their media rights together to sell to media companies. That's the reason, for example, the SEC has significantly more resources than the ACC, because the television package for the SEC is that for football is that much more valuable than for the ACC. So the key for these conferences is to continue to grow their footprint. So you can imagine that the ACC saw great value in adding Cal and Stanford because now you've got a presence on the West Coast of fans that would have an interest now in following ACC football. SMU is also now coming into the ACC, so that's based in the Dallas market. Again, a very attractive television market. And so that's going to increase the value of what a media company is willing to pay for the rights to broadcast football. What Kelly and others have advocated is that what these top universities should really do is the SEC, the ACC, Big 10, Big 12, really should just all collectively pull their football programming together to sell, much like the NFL that has 32 teams but does, right, the league represents all media sales. That's really the ideal place to get with college football. That it would be this collection of college football playoff schools. And they can still, of course, maintain their conference schedules, that alignment, mostly for geographic purposes, even though that's not such a big deal anymore when UCLA is traveling to play, Ohio State. But that would then allow, if you pulled together all the media rights just for football amongst all the power schools, that would allow the conferences with all the other sports to come back to sanity, right? That get back to the regional conferences where student athletes benefit from shorter trips, shorter travel. You get back to the regional rivalries. I have a good friend who's a colleague of mine from the University of Oregon. She's a professor now at Oregon State, and she's the faculty athletic rep there. Imagine, it's almost it's beyond me to think that Oregon and Oregon State are going to stop playing sports against one another. They're 45 miles apart. But literally, you've got this situation where the Pac-12 is now two schools, and trying to figure out what Washington State and Oregon State and how they maintain their credibility in a market where they're no longer part of one of the major conferences. I actually sat down to a dinner a couple months ago with all of the Pac-12 faculty athletic reps. And it was very pleasant. They're all friends, but there's obviously a little bit of a chilliness to it as well, recognizing that 10 of these schools have abandoned 2 of them. So it's a fascinating time in the world of college sports. And I think, in short, what we would say is that it's impossible to predict where we'll be 5 years from now. Really is.
Yeah, that's there's a lot there.
Yeah, there's a lot
talk
there.
for a day about that.
Right.
Let's switch gears. What's the singularity?
Oh, great question. I don't know exactly who coined the phrase. My understanding is it was a term adopted by futurists as far as 30 or 40 years ago to refer to, at the time, it was a hypothetical moment in time where human beings create an intelligence that in many ways is superior to our own. Obviously, we are living through that moment. Artificial intelligence, that's exactly what we've created, right? And the implications of it are really astounding when you think about it very simply. It's that the pace of change is not just accelerating, it's accelerating exponentially. And you see it in all of our lives all the time nowadays. Even what we're talking about right now with college sports, that just imagine all the change that has happened just in 3, 4, 5 years. All the change, and it's easy to think about what the pandemic did for change. At the same time, it really just accelerated the changes that were already coming. And so that's the moment in time that we're living through. You think about, depending on your own beliefs, human beings have been walking this planet for a very, very long time. And what we know is that there's always been this pace of change. It's always been accelerating. What was astounding is to think of how change could accelerate into perpetuity exponentially. And that's literally where we are as a planet right now, and what the implications are. It's really hard to know. We obviously know it impacts marketing in a variety of tremendous ways when you think about all the technology that is being developed and adopted at this point. I always joke I am very excited to have orbit the Earth on my bucket list. 10 years ago, I would not have thought that was the case, but I'm looking forward to going up and having a happy hour, a couple cocktails, do a couple laps around Earth, and come back to Cape Canaveral and be home in time for dinner. But yeah, it's just really, singularity is about the pace of change, ever accelerating, and that it's really about the intelligence that we have created is what will allow that to happen.
And you mentioned its impact on marketing. There's so many, from in advertising. See, there's me conflating marketing and advertising. Easy to do, I guess. From doing your copy from ChatGPT, but there's also the advanced targeting that Meta and Google has now, where you can run, anyone can run ads. You put your credit card in and it'll target for you. And as long as it has the sales data, it'll get your product in front of your customers.
Yeah, certainly on the advertising side, and being able to understand who your right customers are, what's the right message to deliver, and where to deliver that message. I would even take it back even into manufacturing itself. That there's going to be a day soon where with 3D printing, you and I are printing our own shirts. You can think about Walmart and how half of the products that are currently for sale on shelves in a Walmart, you and I could be printing those products in our home 5-10 years from now. Everything from toilet paper to pens to toothbrushes to our clothing. The brands, you talked about brands earlier, that brands are quite concerned about that. We're at a point where you and I, Logan, we could print our own Ralph Lauren polo golf shirt. So the challenge for Ralph Lauren is how do you maintain the value of the logo, your craftsmanship. I believe some of those companies, including Ralph Lauren, now have algorithms that you can download that would allow you to print a specific Ralph Lauren golf shirt, for example. But yeah, the impact of and that's just one technology, of course, 3D printing, and how that changes manufacturing for so many different products and the brands and the competitors in that space. It's very interesting to contemplate a world down the road where you and I are doing a lot of our own manufacturing. And that obviously has retailers concerned, it has brands concerned, in terms of their points of differentiation and things of that nature. So yeah, that would just be one technology that, again, we see the pace of change coming faster and faster. 3D printing is being used for so many different things now. You can manufacture a house with 3D printing, and they are manufacturing, and much less, even human tissue for organ transplants. In fact, if I was in the world of finance, I think what I would really be interested in is learning more and more about the companies that are developing the cartridges of material that are required for the printing. So it's not just the printers themselves, it's the material that goes into it that'll be fascinating. And then, of course, the other major breakthrough that the singularity is part, I think, of the story of the singularity is our move between fission and fusion. And as we get closer and closer to breakthroughs on that, I mean, you and I have been on the planet long enough to know how long we've been concerned about climate change. There's no faster way to resolve climate change issues than major breakthroughs when it comes to energy like that. So yeah, there's just the technology development, but more importantly, the pace of that technology development. That's really, I think, the way that I like to think about the singularity, and it's an interesting time to be living on planet Earth, going through that, and it is sort of interesting how few people. I think people are aware of the quote pace of change, but maybe not haven't really thought about literally what a historic moment that we're experiencing on planet Earth right now.
Yeah, it is crazy. I guess people are just caught up in day to day lives. I mean, it'll make a headline for a couple weeks, but
Mhm.
it's funny when you read history books like about wars, or how we're not going to get into how Russia invaded Ukraine, but that's another country invaded another country, and it was a headline for a couple weeks, and now it's, I mean, it's still there. But that's kind of my grandfather was in Vietnam, and I asked
Mhm.
him, "Hey, what was the news like back then?" Because we look back at it now, and you would think reading a history book, this was all everyone was talking about all day, and maybe they were talking about it more, probably a little less going on without the internet and stuff. But he said, yeah, people lived their day-to-day lives. We were at war. It was in the headlines every now and then, but I feel like unless you're actually being invaded as a country, it's kind of business as usual. And for the US, we've never, I mean, besides Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, and it does make the current Hamas Israeli situation interesting in the sense that why this war is um, so much. I mean, maybe it's a rhetorical question. I think we can all speculate about why this particular war is different. Um, but you didn't see Ukrainians protesting on college campuses, and there's quite a few of them. Um, this is a very different situation in this case. Uh, One of the things, I know that one of the things that we had discussed, maybe talking about, was a little bit about sort of the you had mentioned logarithms and algorithms and things of that nature. One of the big things that I see going on is and this isn't new. This has been a trend for a number of years, but um, historically, when you think about advertising, companies using traditional advertising, right? You're just pushing ads on consumers, television ads, radio ads, billboard ads. The big shift that's really occurred primarily through e-commerce, but now all companies are using this is what they call inbound marketing, which is waiting for an individual to express an interest in a product before you deliver an advertisement. What we've long understood about traditional advertising is that companies are paying to reach people that have no interest in the product. There's actually a term called Wanamaker waste that I use in class, named refers to I believe he was an Episcopal minister back in the turn of the century, like early 1900s, that adopted this phrase, Wanamaker waste, the money that is spent to reach people that have no interest in the product. That's always been a problem with traditional advertising and even evaluating ROI for advertising. So the great benefit, certainly of the world of e-commerce, is that companies can wait to let consumers or other businesses express an interest in a product, whether that's just clicking on an article that was related to something they were interested in. The most obvious example of that is using Google search, or any type of search engine where you enter a word. That means you're interested in learning more about it. And so that's really the way that so many of these algorithms work. Google, it's a Google Ads, for just as an example. It's a function of companies paying, of course, an auction price for what particular words that are used in search. A lot of people don't realize that there's a second component to that, and that is the quality score of the website landing page. Google does not want to recommend a website that doesn't work, that the buttons aren't appropriate, and they're of course are able to track once they've delivered a website to you in search and you've clicked on it. They can then track how long you spent on that website. Did you scroll down it? They can do all kinds of tests using heat maps and things of that nature to determine, all right, we delivered this link to Logan. He clicked on it. If he stayed on it, we're going to boost the quality score of that website, because he wouldn't have stayed on there unless he found something of valuable based on that search. If you immediately exit that website, that obviously is going to hurt the quality score. That could be because the content wasn't relevant. It could be because you didn't like the look of the website, or that you tried to click the chat field and got no customer support. There could be a variety of reasons, of course, why someone would immediately leave a website. But those are really the biggest. There's a lot that goes into the algorithms, but those are really the biggest ones is simply evaluating whether the website delivered or maintained the attention of the person that it was sent to.
So in a way, even over 40 years, the fundamentals are still the same. It has to be quality, it has to get people's attention.
Yes, I think the fundamentals are exactly the same, and if anything, they're more defined or more persuasive in some way. I think one of the things that is occurring, and hopefully this is a short-term thing in our country, is that there's really a lot of polarization around political issues at this point, right? They really have some very loud. Hopefully it's minorities on the extremes of both sides. And you do see that is impacting more and more advertising and where companies want to place advertising. Just with the current campus protests, you can look at your news feed right now. Most of the articles that you'll read about it will describe the protests as pro-Palestinian. And then there's a very predictable group of websites that are referring to it as anti-Israeli protests. That is just such a clear, right thing that you see even in your news feed each day, that you can imagine that an advertiser wants to know whether the media company that they're advertising with, which words are you using? Is it pro-Palestinian or is it anti-Israeli? Because those are very clear markers for who is the audience, who are reading, who is the viewership, the readership of some of these different publications. And so I think that companies are more and more attuned to those things. We saw it with Bud Light a couple years ago with the Bud Light protests. I think I saw actually that there's a new branded beer that's out that's called Far Right. Which is just very, very clearly, right, a response to the Bud Light controversy and trying to appeal to who they perceive as those people that didn't like what Bud Light did. So you're pretty clear if you're going to name your product like that. So I do think, whether this is a long-term trend or not, candidly, I hope not. But there's an element of political politicization that is going on that certainly affects social media, digital media marketing, perhaps more than even traditional.
Do you think, where's the correlation? Because you've seen the Social Network Netflix show about Zuckerberg's kind of rise, and actually no, I guess they were criticizing him. That was
well, it was in the eye of the beholder. Yeah, they were pretty critical of him as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Or maybe it was the Social Dilemma. One was like his biography, one was a documentary. Yeah. I think it was the Social Dilemma. But they were saying, not him, the company of Facebook can literally turn up kind of a news story if they wanted to show up. And there was a lot of controversy around the election. I'm sure it'll come up this year with the other election.
100%, and there's even more, of course, concern about foreign interests that know also how to manipulate Meta and their algorithms. Um, I tell students all the time in class that you would really behoove yourself to just click on articles even if you disagree with the title. And if nothing else, that's going to ensure is that you're still receiving a variety of either objective, non-biased, or at least a variety of different perspectives on any given article. Your our news feeds are really more and more and more customized for what we read, what we're interested in. So um, I've long thought that there's nothing more important, I think, than being able to play devil's advocate to your own opinions. Um, I've joked with students over the years that I'm interested in hearing your opinion. The next thing I'm going to ask you is what's the best counter argument you can make for that opinion? And if you don't have a counter argument, then you haven't thought of it enough. And I really think we're in a world right now that it does concern me how few people can articulate eloquently a counter argument, right? A different perspective. Being able to articulate it doesn't mean that you're agreeing with it. It means that you've given it enough thought and that you've at least acknowledged that there are other perspectives. And that I think is a broader societal issue that we're struggling with is the good old role of devil's advocate. Being able to question even your own beliefs.
Yeah, going back to, I'm thinking maybe the algorithmization of America. I mean, it's literally everyone's on social media. More kids are on it, good or bad, better or worse. Kids are going to be kids at the end of the day. But I mean, like you said, if you look at something, it'll give you something similar. It'll give you something similar. It's kind of it's like a built-in confirmation bias, and you can scroll as long as you want. And
That's the
that has to
perfect
have an effect.
psychological phrase for that, confirmation bias. People that are only reading things and taking in and accepting things that they agree with and immediately push away or discount anything that doesn't, isn't consistent with that belief. So that is a major issue. I appreciate you bringing up that phrase. That's exactly right. There's some very strong confirmation biases. The challenge, I think the social media side of things, again, it's great for marketers, because social media, it's always been about understanding again who your customers are, and through social media we can learn a lot about what people like, their usage patterns, what they purchase, what they follow, all of those kinds of things. And that's always to marketers been much more value than demographic characteristics. Um, you know, 25, 30 years ago, many companies were left with just things like census data to try to segment markets, right? And that's going to be based on things like geography, zip codes, social status, right? Marital status, race, religion, demographics. Those are so unpredictable and unreliable for actually determining what behaviors, right, someone's going to want to purchase. So it's the psychographic and the behavioral information that is so valuable that can be captured in social media. So from a marketing perspective, it's great, especially if you're able to engage with customers in a very healthy way. A whole nother question to bring up that you've touched on here is about general health, mental health, and what role phone usage is playing in mental health. Um, I don't really know where else to go with it. I'm the father of two teenagers, young teenagers. Both between them and their friends, I see how challenging it is for them to be able to engage and interact socially one on one in person, when they're doing so much of their engagement online. And one of the first papers I ever published Logan, was a paper on how negative word of mouth in in e-commerce is 10 times more likely to be spread than positive word of mouth. And part of that is, of course, the anonymity associated with online, online discourse. So
Keyboard warriors.
the simple point is that people say things to each other online that they would never say if they were standing face to face with someone. And there's no question that this is having a major impact, I think, on our youth, but our adults. I and there's plenty of evidence out there. Obviously, it's still emerging. It's sort of hard to have a big meta-analysis yet of exactly what's been the impact of social media on health, mental health. But there's plenty of speculation, a lot of theories, and more. And I think it's really just sort of intuitive for most of us that there's a lot of cons associated with our heavy use of our social media.
Yeah, there's so much there. I mean, I was just watching a podcast with Gary V. Vaynerchuk. He's a big marketing guy. He's been
Yeah,
around on Chris Williamson's pod. He's another guy I listen to.
yeah,
But he was saying,
they're
yeah, the
both
same
fantastic.
thing. Kind of yeah, they're awesome. The keyboard warrior stuff.
Yeah,
But Gary V had a good point. He was saying what you're seeing is more into kind of people's minds, stuff they wouldn't say on the street because they get punched in the face. Now they can say, which I feel like a lot of it is negative. So maybe more of the truth of like human nature is coming out, but we're just we got to iron the wrinkles or something. There's just that kind of also brings me to, the line between social media advertising and just kind of our personal privacy. I'm thinking of Neuralink when that gets implanted into everyone's head. I mean, are our thoughts going to be ours? Is that, it's just.
yeah. And on the privacy side, I think most people, would we know that we're going to be exposed to advertising. Um, we have so many services, including all these social media services that are quote free. Um, they're free because advertisers are the support of that business model for the service provider, of course. Um, the positive about it to me is that I think most of us tend to now get advertising that is generally relevant for who we are, what we're interested in, the products and services that we may be curious about buying. In other words, that the messages are much more targeted. I don't get nearly as many advertisements directed toward me that I would have no interest in, right? It's much more advanced, obviously, in terms of what's being delivered. And at the same time, that's troubling that a company knows enough about me from my social networking or use of digital media that they know a good bit about who I am. So that is going to continue to be obviously a major issue as we continue to develop all kinds of facial recognition software, all of those kinds of things. We can see value in it, especially when it comes to security, confidentiality, being able to turn your phone on and know that hey, I'm the only one that can turn this thing on because it uses my footprint or a fingerprint or my face. And at the same time, that these are all technologies that can obviously be used in a variety of other ways. We saw that with the January 6th riots, the facial recognition technology. I was just reading an article right before I jumped on with you this morning that at UCLA, given the protests and the things that happened there in the last 48 hours, that they're basically using the same technology. There's no doubt, for example, in my mind, that one of the reasons why so many of these protesters are, of course, covering their face is this type of technology. They recognize that the facial recognition cameras will eventually be able to identify. So there you go back again to the anonymity. The protesters for the Vietnam War, they everyone knew who was out there. We're now in an era where you've got protesters that are basically able to do that largely anonymous, and also obviously makes it very difficult to track people that are engaging in behavior that's again breaking laws or breaking campus rules and things of that nature.
Yeah, I guess it does get dangerous too if a person's the truth is not coming out of a person. If they're just trying to incite something from an anonymous profile, then it's just, you're just adding fuel to the fire for absolutely no reason.
Yes, you're exactly right. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Jones, I appreciate your time today. It's been awesome. I don't think I've ever talked to anyone that has the knowledge of marketing, but also kind of the insight into the future. So I appreciate it. This has been
I
awesome.
wish I had insight into the future. One of my favorite phrases is that the great entrepreneurs don't see down the road; they see around the corner. Everyone can see what's down the road, right? If you're looking, it's the wise person that can sort of predict what's no one else is seeing coming. And I certainly wouldn't claim that that's me. We can speculate about the impact of technology. We can go back to like I said, just in the world of sport, I have no idea what things are going to look like 5 years from now. I think if we're going to wrap this up on one theme, it's that we just know change is coming. And it's going to be coming fast, and that's not going to abate at any given time. And the question is, how long can we continue to accelerate exponentially when it comes to pace of change? Who knows?
I love it. I'll
Yeah.
be here for it. I'll be ready.
Thank you, Logan. That was an hour that flew by. Really appreciate your time, and have a great evening.